Yay.
All right. Welcome back to the dungeon where we geek out on all things horror, thriller, mystery, and suspense. And we have a new member or a new visitor to our dungeon. And we are talking to Payton McCarty-Simas. Payton, how you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. Loving the dungeon. Looks great.
It looks good. Yeah, we a lot of decoration, a lot of did a lot of artsy fartsy stuff, I guess you could call, here in the dungeon. We want to make it homey, because so that type of thing.
Of course.
So, well, we are let me just read you a little blurb here that you have on your webpage, just to give us what everybody's appetite of who you are and what we are going to be talking about in this video. Payton, that's you. You are an author, programmer, film critic, and video artist with a focus on horror and genre films. Your writing has been featured in Bright Lights Film Journal, Film Days, and the Brooklyn Rail, among others. Your short films and screenplays have been featured in several film festivals, as well as shown at the Hammer Museum in LA. So you are also the author of 2 books of nonfiction and film criticism. One looks like it was published last year, called One Step Short of Crazy, National Treasure on the Landscape of American Conspiracy Culture. And the book we are going to be talking about today in this video, which is That Very Witch, Fear, Feminism, and the American Witch Film. And
yes, indeed.
And you are a member of the Online Association of Female Film Critics and GALECA. Pardon my ignorance, but what I don't know what that stands for.
It's a queer film critics society. So.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
And that is you.
And that's
well, we're talking about this Very Witch. It's coming out July 22nd, 2025. I believe it's being published by a company called Academia Lunaire.
Yeah, they're a subset of Luna Press. They do a lot of academic books on fantasy stuff and horror stuff. They're very cool, and it's been super fun working with them.
Okay, great. So yeah, typically when I have an author on, we're dealing with some kind of a horror fiction book, or a little bit of sci-fi, that stuff like that. I think we only had one other person on that had an academia like a textbook, essentially, of and
yeah,
now,
I feel like one of my favorite soapboxes to get on is that nonfiction can be as fun and funky as fiction. Like I try to make history weird, and create these narratives. Like it's, I think the one thing I tried really hard to do with this book is make it not a reference text. Like I want it to be a fun read. Because there are so many great books on genre film that are more encyclopedic.
right.
But this one I really tried to create like a political and historical narrative. So I hope it's fun to read as well.
Oh, it is, and it's a chunky book. So it's what I think some Stephen King novels have rivals of this book. Now this took you what, 5 years to complete?
Such a long time. Yes.
Now is it 5 years of research or just 5 years of or just 5 years period of writing and researching?
It was a lot of research. I definitely wrote throughout, so some of the chapters include excerpts of articles that I've published over the years. My master's thesis is part two of this book on the 80s, right? So it's like I've known that this was the end goal for long enough that I've been able to build it up over time. But a lot of that research period was spent watching hundreds of witch movies and reading hundreds of issues of Playboy and, various other things like Hunter S. Thompson and Susan Faludi and just bringing it all in, reminding myself what was going on in the 2000s, not just like Bush wise, but also like Harry Potter wise, right?
Mm.
Revisiting the objects of my childhood and really trying to get a flavor because for me, like what I enjoy doing most with film history is treating it as kind of a sociological thing where you're not going to understand the period unless you're understanding the art, and you're not going to understand the art unless you understand what's going on, right? So,
Right.
with this book, my goal was to present little mini capsule histories of the politics of a moment, the feminism of a moment, the film culture of a moment, and then within that, what do witch movies look like, and what can we learn about all of those things through these movies?
Yeah, definitely. It's a whole thing about art imitating life and vice versa. And
Hmm.
because one of the ways, because I think it's a disservice when people talk about even like TV shows and movies. It's like, well, yeah, they can't get away with that stuff if that stuff was done today. It's like, well, you can still watch those things, or people want like a reboot of something that was done back then, and kind of, I don't know, if their attempt to whitewash it, or history revisionism, or whatever their 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 idea of doing it is like, if you want to find out what it's like uh during that time that the movie takes place, you got to take the movie. And a classic example just recently of this year is the movie Sinners.
Hmm.
I mean, I saw that. Well, first I bought it when it came on Amazon, because it's like, oh, that's a great movie. And then I've already seen it in the theaters twice, because that's a movie that just needs to be seen in the theaters. But
Totally.
the whole racism stuff like that, I mean, I laughed when that one guy says the KKK doesn't exist anymore. It's like,
Hmm.
dude, it's the 2020s. It does exist today. So you're full of shit, even 50 years later.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and
But
that movie is so self-conscious about pulling in history, right? Like that beautiful scene with all of the different dance and music forms over
oh
time.
yeah,
Like, you're not going to understand why Stevie Wonder's there if you're not paying attention. You know what I mean?
right.
And yeah, like TV is another great example where the X-Files was part of a really broad resurgent interest in aliens in the 90s. Why, right? Or like, I do a lot of queer film history, right? So like in the 90s, there were a lot of episodes of TV with lesbian kisses in them. Why, right? Like it's
Mm.
not one off, it's a trend. And it coincides with like there was a time cover about bisexuality that was happening. So it's always political and there's always something more going on. And I really like pulling out those threads. It feels like a mystery to
Mm.
solve.
Now, in all the different movies that you've seen, and there's quite a you have 5 pages at the end of this book of movie indexes of it, and we're talking small print, single space, okay, people. So it's quite a bit. Now, when you're looking at especially the different uh, I guess decades of horror movies and so forth. And specifically with witch films, which is what this book here deals a lot with, is do you find much differences, or what different if so what differences do you find with witch films throughout the decades that were directed or written by women versus written or directed by men?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it really depends. There are fewer examples of witch films directed by women up until the 90s, and even then there are only a couple. But in the 2010s in particular, there was an explosion of witch films directed by women that were pretty high profile, right? Like you have the Craft Legacy, you have the Black Christmas remake, you obviously have the Love Witch, which is its own very specific thing because Annabelle is such a fascinating, idiosyncratic character. But witch films directed by women have a tendency to take the tropes that are on display in the movies directed by men and kind of reverse them. So ultimately, looking at the broad sweep of history, something that I really enjoy about witch films is that witches do have a set of generic conventions, right? Like you usually get a witch burning, right? Like, it's a revenge narrative. There are these things that come up over time, but they can look and feel really different depending on the moment they're in. They're kind of a sponge for what's going on beyond the broad strokes of concerns around women's empowerment and concerns around revenge against the men who disempower them. Which is, it's also important to note that witches, according to a lot of film scholars, are the only predominantly female horror monster, right? Like you can have female vampires, that's common, right? But witches, generally speaking, women, and that's because it's based in the historical reality of witch trials and witch burnings, right? It's a real history of femicide that we've based this lore onto. And it's kind of a boogeyman for the inappropriate behaviors that women are not supposed to display, right? Like, desire for power, desire for sexuality, whatever you have. And so in the witch movies directed by women, there's usually more of a recognition of the systemic factors that come into play, right? Where like witch films like The Witch or Suspiria, the remake, are really cathartic and lovely because they suggest that you can beat the system. Like there's an escape you can attain, like at the end of that movie when in The Witch, when she's floating up and she's laughing, she's literally dismantled the patriarchy for herself, right? And escaped that system. But in witch movies directed by women, that's usually not the case. It's much more about coming together, finding solidarity among groups of women. In the Black Christmas remake, the men are warlocks who are trying to steal power from women, right? So it's looking at the way that witch trials play historically as a tool of oppression and trying to figure out how to make feminist change in, I would say, a more realistic way. I have a chapter on that I actually had to cut from the book because, as you say, it's a brick. But it's coming out in the Journal of Supernatural Studies this summer, so that's going to be floating around there as well.
Okay, so like a supplemental to to this book,
Yeah.
or is it going to be part of a whole new book of some other things?
It'll be an article, so
Okay, okay.
shorter. There's so many witch movies coming out all the time, and some of my friends, I mean, I probably watched 400, 500 movies. Not all of them made the, passing references to things aside, like there's a lot of stuff that I just didn't include here. And my friends who like hopped in and out to watch them with me, were like, once you see it, everything's a witch movie. And that
Mhm.
brain never goes away. Like
Okay,
the backstories and things, the kind of supernaturalism that pervades a particular kind of more fantastical horror often touches on witch movies. So I'm sure you could write infinitely more about witches, but for now I've got the big book and the articles. So
okay, all right. Well, let's dig a little bit more into the book. Now, you divide it up into the decades or certain
mhm.
I guess seasons in the sense of both what films have gone through and then uh, in direct correlation what society was going through at that time. And the first one, you start off way back. You start off way back in like in the '60s, and you call this the countercultural witches.
Mhm.
So can you kind of give us a I don't know a Reader's Digest version of what what do you cover in that section of the book?
Yeah, totally. That section, to me, that is the most important period in cinema history for witches, not just because they were a huge, important element of the exploitation cinema, they were also a really big element of the culture writ large. And you can really absorb a lot of what was going on politically and culturally through that figure. And she's had such a long legacy. Like every witch cycle through the present is informed by the bones that we created with the birth of the second wave feminist movement, right? So in the 60s, there was a renewed interest in New Age spirituality, exploring alternate lifestyles, right? It's the counterculture. It's hippies, but not just
Mm.
hippies. It's everybody coming to terms with the fact that, you know, things are more in the open, right? You've got the pill. Eventually you'll have legalized abortion. And there's a lot of disillusionment happening politically in the culture as well, right? So all of those things come together to create an environment in which witchcraft itself is allowed to thrive. So in 1958 in England, the government repealed their anti-witchcraft laws, which led to a bunch of covens coming into being, right? You have Alexander's creating Alexandrian Wicca, which is then imported to the US alongside a lot of movies about witchcraft. And these movies are really cool. They then get taken up by AIP, Roger Corman, and then it's just part of the broader exploitation cycle, right? Witches are typically associated with sexuality, because a lot of the historical witchcraft accusations are rooted in fears around feminine sexuality and women's sexuality. And so you get a lot of softcore movies about witches in the 60s. You get a lot of Mondo documentaries about witches in the 60s. And then you have the more elevated examples of witch films in the 60s, most obviously Rosemary's Baby, right? So Rosemary's Baby is a good way of seeing how the art house and the grindhouse kind of come together in the new Hollywood. And Rosemary's Baby obviously is the story of a woman trying to free herself from bodily disempowerment, right? She's, you know, her husband is manipulating her, this coven is manipulating her. She's Catholic and trying to contend with these questions that are floating around at the time, right? That time cover that's asking, is God dead? So it's all in the air, and the Polanski film and the Levin novel really bring that to the fore, right? So I'm trying to think in terms of the Cliff's Notes. The other thing that's really important for the witch that you can draw out of that period is psychedelia. Witches are associated with altered states of consciousness, right? And there are a lot of theories around early witch trials and fungi and accidental ingestion of substances, hallucinations, and all of that. And the countercultural witch, she was known as the nouveau witch in sociological terms. Somebody wrote a study on these covens that were popping up. And on the other end, you have like feminists taking up the symbol of the witch and using her as a kind of performative form of activism as well. So you had this group called WATCH, the Women's International Terrorist Conspiracy from Hell, who would put on their pointy hats and go stand outside men's clubs and things. But a lot of them were doing acid, right? So the aesthetics of these witch films are very overtly psychedelic. And that also pulls through to the present.
Okay. All right. So that takes in the 60s, also into the early part of the 70s. And
Mhm.
then when you hit the 80s, which is the time I grew up, you know, back when music was good, in my humble opinion. Uh, you got the feminism, and that's when the satanic panic really
Yes.
started gaining ground there. So how does the I guess witches I could understand how it gets into the satanic panic, but during the 80s feminism,
Mhm.
how does that all kind of
Yeah, well, it's
coalesce?
interesting because in the 60s and 70s, it really felt feminism was gaining traction. There was a lot of progress being made, and that builds into the concerns in some of these movies, right? It's like women are visibly gaining ground in the workforce, in their protections, in their bodily autonomy. And then in the 80s, there was a massive backlash to the feminist movement, right? You've got your Phyllis Schlafly's, you've got your Anita Bryant's. It builds into like the homophobia of the period. And the Satanic Panic was basically the confluence of conservatives' concerns around the counterculture of the 60s and 70s. It's like the world has gone to hell. And these people have gone so far that, they've brought about hell on earth, basically, right? So it's concerns around specifically culture. It's like Satan's in the music, Satan's in the movies, and he's influencing teenagers to commit violent acts against God, basically. So, with that in mind, right, if there's been an explosion of witch films in the 60s and 70s, my assumption going into this project would be that there are a lot of witch films in the 80s, right? Like, if they're saying that there are actual Satanists and witches in classrooms, then you'd think that there would be a lot of movies about witches at the time, but there aren't. So, it's a really interesting conundrum, right? It's like, where did they go and why is what I'm investigating in that section. And basically, what I've come to argue is that because women were gaining power in the 60s and 70s, then witches were allowed to be a powerful source of fear. But at a period in time when the goal of the dominant culture is to disempower women, trying to take them back home, out of the workforce, reproducing and reestablishing quote unquote traditional values, then you can't actually afford to have the same power in that symbol, right? Like they have to become a joke to disempower the women, the feminists of the time. So the witches you do see are typically in horror comedies and not in horror films proper. You have the most obvious example is The Witches of Eastwick, which a very fun film that I do love, but it is a deeply moralistic film based on a novel that has been described as one of the most anti-feminist books of its moment. It was a response to the counterculture. It was a rejection of free love. And the witches in that film, at least specifically in the book, but in both examples, are presented as kind of like wantonly embracing a hedonistic lifestyle at the risk of destroying everything, right? And then you have Elvira, who I adore her. But she is a good example of the ways in which you had to present yourself as non-threatening in order to further this kind of narrative trope, right? Like she's a good witch at the end of the day, and she's fighting a bad warlock. Which is another thing I actually cut from the book was a chapter on warlocks in the 80s, because there were a ton of those, which I think is a response to AIDS. I think it's a homophobic fear response for a lot of people. And it became part of the fantasy landscape. But yeah, so I look through the horror films that do exist from the time that have witches in them. I look a lot at genre and horror comedy and what horror comedies do politically. And it's such a fun and weird period of history to talk about, right? If the 60s bring together a lot of these really colorful and vibrant threads, the 80s bring out the darker elements of those same things, which I had a blast reading about. The paranoia of that period is really yummy to to look into.
Yeah, I was too young to have any interest or mindset in the political goings on at that time. But looking back, it's like, my God, yeah, I'm I'm kind of glad my mom sheltered me. Just so, but yeah, and then we get into the 2000s and more recently about uh, with I mean, I think one of the first ones I think of, I think that introduced this was, and I don't even remember what year it came out. Was it in 2000? Was Alien, and Ripley just being just So the whole thing of superheroes and even the final girls type of thing in horror movies,
Sure.
and even in science fiction, where the women in the cast were not just something nice to look at, type of thing, but
Right.
they had a very uh, uh, purposeful and very significant uh, outcome of what happened. It's like, okay, well, the badass badass girl, and you call this the uh, uh, later on in the book you call it the girl power, and what I
Mhm.
I kind of call the bad bitch witch.
Yeah,
So
totally. Yeah, I mean, once you get to the 90s, there's another resurgence of feminist witchcraft, right? You've got all of these like primers for young witches that you sell at Barnes and Noble, right? You've got the craft, and you also have an angrier kind of feminism, right? That's a response to the Clarence Thomas, Anita Hill trial, the O.J. Simpson thing. There's a lot of stuff going on in the media that enrages feminists and bursts the third wave of feminism. Elizabeth Wurtzel, who wrote Prozac Nation, has a book called Bitch from that period that's suggesting that like being a good girl has never helped anybody do anything. And so it's best if we're all just bitches, if we all just embrace the power of being an angry personality. And so then you get movies like The Craft, which the end of that movie is disappointing and upsetting. Like it's the what they do to Nancy Downs sucks, and I did come across a review from that period that was talking about how you should just leave the theater 15 minutes early and you'll like the movie better. So that's my philosophy on that movie is like just get out of there before they do Nancy like that. But Nancy is probably the ultimate 90s witch, right? She's a badass and her when her dad abuses her, she doesn't, ask him nicely to stop. She kills him. So it's a very raged out revenge kind of a character that's very empowering. In that context, right? Where it's like if you've gone through the 80s and you've had it up to here, it's 1992, it's the year of the woman, and we're doing something else in the 90s. But then cyclically, the 2000s happen, freedom fries, Bush too, talking about, the National Right to Life Day, and Harry Potter comes around, and Christians are burning it in mass, right? So you can see echoes of the Satanic Panic during that period. Anytime that there's progress made for women, there's a subsequent backlash. So speaking to what you were talking about in terms of the badass witch, right? Like I describe the witches of the 2000s as kind of lean in girl boss types by the end of the decade, where we've got that kind of corporatized feminism. But in the 2010s, as the Me Too movement is happening and the Women's March happens, and all of this anger and resentment towards the new, rising conservative backlash happens. You have movies like The Witch and Midsummer and Suspiria and Color Out of Space, all of which are about women having it, being fucking over it. And you see that same kind of arc that happens in the 90s and the 60s happening again. So that's kind of the rise and fall cycles of how these things go. Yeah.
and that's one of the things that I appreciate about this book is uh when that was, and you just touched upon it, is usually when somebody hears the word feminism, they automatically think of this man bashing, man hating attitude, just thing of like, now when those were the elements of the time that just I guess migrated over into film and vice versa, that type of thing. You call those things out and you talk about those things, but uh, the I guess the spirit or the attitude of the book, your spirit when writing the book, uh, doesn't come off as that feminism man hating type thing. It's you call it out for what it is, what it was happening, but it doesn't have, it has the facts of feminism, but it doesn't have uh, the mean spirited of what people may think of feminism when they hear that word. And that's one of the
Sure.
things I really liked about the book.
Thank you. I think, yeah, like every period I try to take in context, right? So I talk about what's going on at the time to make women angry. And I talk about how that translates into the kinds of protests women are doing. I think if this book can help teach people that feminism isn't about hating men, it's about gaining rights, and is usually a response to fear on the other side, right? I think something I try to foreground is that these movies are reflecting a deep concern at what happens if women have power. There's a fear from the other side, usually conservatives, and that's not just men, that's women too, right? That's your Anita Bryant's. The idea is you're going to disrupt something and take something away from somebody else.
Right.
And that's simply not the case. And you see that with all kinds of movements, right? You see that with gay liberation in the 60s as well. It's like any threat to tradition is presented by the person who's afraid as a monster. And what I want to do is tell people that feminism is not a monster, right? Like the what people are afraid of in terms of feminism is witches. Witches represent the angry feminism that people find scary. And so I'm trying to explain why and where that rage comes from and what it means and what we can learn from it. So it's really fun looking at history that way, because I think it makes topics like feminism more approachable for people who may have a preconceived notion as well. I love the word feminist, but I totally understand that other people were raised in a different context. And I talk about that in the 2000s in particular. I talk about how women didn't want to use the word feminist because it had been so thoroughly kind of slandered by the Republican Party at the time, right? So you have all these
Right.
celebrities being like, I'm a humanist, because they didn't feel like they had the space to embrace feminism as a term.
Yeah, as I could understand. I mean, not being a woman, I can't understand it that way, but I could at least I could definitely understand it of the stigmatism and the terminology. It's like because I'm an atheist, and it took me 3 years of, I guess, deconstructing or just because I was already kind of on that road, but it took me 3 years to actually say the A word.
Mm,
No,
sure.
and it got to the point. I think what did it for me was like, you know what? Uh, I think the result is going to be the same regardless what I call myself. So I may as well just, hey, I'm gonna be able to look at myself in the mirror and like what I see, type of thing. I'm gonna be able to sleep well, and yeah, that's about it. So it took me 3 years to actually bring myself to use that word and actually call myself one
Mhm.
of those things. But
Definitely.
yeah, so definitely. So as I said in the beginning, this is a chunky book, but it's you have you have 24 page. I counted them because you have 24 pages of references, APA formatted, and
Mhm.
for all my fellow, if you went to college, if your professor was anything like mine, is like he looked at those APA things, references, and if you did it the wrong format or you misplaced a period or somewhere, he
Oh,
he
yes.
took he took a 1 point off right off of that. So
Oh, totally.
anyway, yeah.
I do my citations by hand, which other people I know think I'm a freak for, but I find it very relaxing. So I did all of those by hand. I remember I had Hereditary on in the background while I was doing the last page of citations. So
So yeah, very well done. And again, we're talking small print, single space. So, But yeah, so anyway, That Very Witch comes out July 22nd, 2025. Uh, if you're studying film, you need to get this book. If you're not studying film, maybe you have no interest in film whatsoever, have no interest in horror whatsoever, but you're taking a college course in women's studies or gender studies, you need to get this book. If you're not taking any college courses, you need to get this book because just to be able to get uh, a very well thought out, very highly researched uh, analysis of the sign of the times, what was going on, how the movies depicted that. You get this book. Payton, thank you so much for joining us in the dungeon. If people want to find out more about you, your books, you speaking anywhere, speaking engagements, where could they go?
Yeah, so you can Google me and I have a website, but I give all of my major updates on Instagram. My handle is Pate Place at PaytPlace. I'm doing a book tour this summer, so I'm going to be hopping all around. I'll have a moment in Canada. I'll be in LA, I'll be in Salem, I'll be all around. So you can follow me there and keep up. And I'd love to see everybody there. And I really hope this book is as fun to read as I wanted it to be. There's so much weird shit going on, and I think people will enjoy it.
Very much, very much. I know I enjoyed it. It took some time to get through because, like I said, it's a chunky book. Uh,
Well, thanks
but
for having me.
But thank you so much for being a guest on the dungeon. If you want to come back anytime, just let me know. We have a cell reserved right for you. So thank you so much.
Thank you.